never made it, but I know what it takes. I'm motivated by a mix of emotion. Got my statement, and I'm reading it slow so I can understand it fully. Appreciate my standing, go out of this world and right on time. Oh, never in my life have I seen the sky light up like this. I'm far away from Earth and I wanna know if you exist. Mission control, do you read me? Send me my coordinates lately. Mission control, am I drifting? Tie me to someone who will love me, yeah. Wait, I think I'll last a bit longer, fine.
Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to another Ref Brandon and the Todd family YouTube video. Wherever you are, whatever you may be doing, thank you so much for making Ref Brandon and the Todd family a part of your day. We always greatly appreciate it. It's a Thursday. Hopefully everybody is enjoying their week so far. Don't forget, all except for the 3 states that do not have a time change, time changes this upcoming Saturday night / Sunday morning. So if you go to bed early enough, you will get an extra hour of sleep Saturday night because the time goes back this Saturday night / Sunday morning. There are, I believe, 3 states that the time doesn't change, but everywhere else, time changes this upcoming Saturday night, so you get an extra hour of sleep. Hopefully everybody is enjoying the college football we've already had so far this week. We had some action games on Tuesday night and some MAC games last night. And of course, there's some games coming up tonight as well. But because of the NFL now playing on Thursday nights, and it now being on Amazon Prime, and usually the NFL tries to schedule good games. Of course, it doesn't always work that way for the most part. This year, the Thursday night games have been flat out terrible, but when you schedule them ahead of time, you think it's going to be a good game. So the college Thursday night game is typically not any good. So we won't talk about the Thursday night games, but I will be talking about the game tomorrow night and some of the games coming up on Saturday. But first, I've got a few thoughts about the first college football playoff poll that came out Tuesday night. I know I mentioned in yesterday's video that if anybody had anything they'd like to say about it, please feel free to go ahead and let me know. And I said last week, do not panic if your team is not where you think they should be, and do not get too excited if another team is higher than you think they should be, because we're not always going to agree with the committee. That is the joy of the whole entire playoff system, because how boring would it be if we agreed with everything they say every week? But it never ceases to amaze me how every single year since the playoffs started, the top 4 teams in the first poll are not how it ends. But yet every single year, everybody jumps off ledges because a certain team's too high, a certain team's too low, this team gets too much love, this team gets no respect, and by the time the season ends, it always plays out most of the time about where it should be. The only team that always gets too much love is Alabama. That's never going to change. I've mentioned that many a times here on the channel, and I'll keep talking about it because for some reason, people love Nick Saban. As long as Nick Saban is their coach, Bama could be 6-6, and they're going to be a top 10 team. That's just the facts. There's nothing we can do about it. We might as well get used to it. But I will say that this is the first year that I can remember that, for the most part, I actually agreed with the polls, with the exception of Alabama. They're way too high, but they're Alabama. But usually, in years past, when the poll comes out, you can tell by what they say and where the teams are ranked that they either go strictly by the eye test and that's it, or they go strictly by what your resume says, and that's it, or they go strictly by the brand name and your logo, and that's it. But this year, if you actually look and study over the poll, it looks like they're going by resume, they're going by the eye test, they're going by who you've played at home, who you've played on the road, and all those things should matter, and all those things should always matter, but most of the time they don't. So this is the first time that I've been pleasantly surprised by them, because it actually appears like they're doing all the right things and they're doing their homework, so to speak. And I know I mentioned in last week's video that I thought Georgia would be number one, and I did. And I was surprised they were not, but they shouldn't have been. I just thought they would be, because they're the defending national champions and they have not lost yet. So I thought the committee would say, well, you know what? Georgia won it all last year. They ain't lost yet. They're number one. But if you look over the resumes, Tennessee should have been number one. Tennessee deserves to be number one. I just didn't think they would be number one. And outside of Alabama, I have no problems with anybody else being ranked where they are. The only reason why I say Alabama's too high is because, first of all, just going by the eye test, they have not impressed me at all in any game they've played so far this year. Now, I can't explain the reasons why they haven't impressed me, because they have the talent, they have the coaching, but something's just missing on this year's team. They struggled to beat an average at best Texas team. You struggled to beat a pitiful Texas A&M team, and they lost to Tennessee. So they haven't beaten anybody worth a darn all year long. So the eye test tells me they're not any good, and their resume tells me they're not any good. But they're Alabama, so they still get all the hype and all the fame, even though they do not deserve it. But I know a lot of people were up in arms about Clemson being number 4. But if you compare resumes with Clemson and Michigan, Clemson has 3 wins over ranked teams this year, and Michigan has 1. So just going by the resume, that tells you Clemson is more deserving of that number 4 spot than Michigan is. But of course, Clemson is always the hated team, no matter where they're at in the poll. People complain. They could have been number 10, and people would still say they're too high. They never get any love. And just going by the resume itself, they've played better teams than Michigan has. And me personally, just going by the eye test, I think they look better than Michigan does. And I think if Clemson played Michigan this Saturday, I think Clemson wins by 10 points. That's just my opinion. But I've always said that I don't watch ESPN unless there is a game on. So I did not watch anything to do with the playoff poll Tuesday night. All I did was wait until about 8 or 8:30 Tuesday night and get on the internet and read what the poll looked like, because I refuse to watch ESPN because they're a bunch of idiots. And I always hear more and more people complaining, finally realizing how ESPN is a bunch of idiots. And I was reading yesterday how Reese Davis talked to, I don't know, whoever he talked to Tuesday night about why Clemson was ranked where they are. And the person told him they've got 3 wins over ranked teams. And Reese Davis had this look on his face like he just did not know Clemson had 3 wins over ranked teams. So that just tells you how stupid the people at ESPN are. And they're up in arms wanting to make a case for TCU to be number 4 instead of Clemson. But the problem is they're 3 spots behind Clemson. If they were 5th, I could see that. But you're talking about TCU jumping Clemson, but you're not even mentioning Alabama or Michigan. And of course, they're not going to mention Alabama because ESPN has a love fest with Alabama. But you can't make that argument unless TCU is number 5. If they're number 7, you can't say put them past Clemson. Well, what about Michigan? What about Alabama? But they're never going to talk bad about Alabama. But the one thing I will say is that I've never understood why, when the playoff poll comes out, they waste our time ranking 25 teams, because nobody outside of maybe the top 16, 17 teams has a legitimate chance to win the national championship. And some of those teams don't have a chance. I'm just talking about some of the ones that only have one loss, because we have yet to see a two-loss team make the playoff. So even inside the top 15, those two-loss teams don't have a chance. So why do they waste our time giving us 25 teams when only maybe a legit 10 of them have a chance to win a national championship? They should only do 15 teams, maybe. Now, if the playoff expands to 12 teams, then give me 25 teams. But don't waste my time over an hour, hour and a half talking about 25 playoff teams and only maybe half of those have a chance to make the playoffs. It's just a waste of time. I've never understood that. But only one team that debuted at number one in the first initial playoff poll did not finish in the top four. And that one team was the very first year the playoff poll came out, 2014, when the first ever playoff poll came out, and the number one team was Mississippi State. And if memory serves me correct, they lost the very next week, and then they lost the very next week. They had no business being number one. They just were because everybody loved Dan Mullen for some stupid reason, and everybody loved Dak Prescott for some stupid reason. But outside of Mississippi State, every other year, whichever team has debuted at number one in the first playoff poll has not finished any lower than number four. So that might be good news for Tennessee. We'll have to wait and see. But let's go ahead and talk about some games coming up this weekend. Tomorrow night we have Oregon State at Washington, and the reason why that game means something is because Oregon State's actually ranked right now, so we'll see if they can continue their winning ways. I know I mentioned leading up to the USC game that Oregon State was actually better than most people knew, and they're proving it right now because we're in November and they only have 2 losses on the season. Now, Saturday we have at noon Texas Tech at TCU. We'll have to see how long TCU can continue to be undefeated. I'm glad they are. I hope they continue doing it. But Sonny Dykes has never had an undefeated team this late in the season. So will he buckle under pressure or keep it up? I don't know. But Texas Tech is the fastest offensive team in America. So when you run 105 plays a game, you're going to have 2 or 3 plays a game where the defense just gets a busted coverage and you're able to score. So with that being said, it should be a competitive game, but I do think TCU will win. We also have a North Carolina at Virginia Saturday at noon, and it looks like, unless they just completely, totally fall apart, North Carolina is going to play Clemson in the ACC championship game. So North Carolina needs to continue winning and keep that momentum going and see how high they can get in the polls when they play Clemson in the ACC championship game coming up next month. We also have Tulane at Tulsa. And the reason why this game means something is because Tulane right now is the highest rated Group of 5 team. And of course, we know the highest rated Group of 5 team always gets a New Year's Six bowl game. And this year, it's not Boise State, it's not Central Florida, it's not Cincinnati. Right now, it's the Tulane Green Wave. So they need to continue winning to make sure they get that New Year's Six bowl spot. And also at noon, we have the battle of the We Suck Out Loud programs when the Florida Gators take on the Texas A&M Aggies. That game should be competitive because both teams suck. And then at 3:30 Saturday, we have Tennessee at Georgia. Of course, it's the game of the weekend, probably the game of the year. I don't think it's any less intriguing because it's not 1 versus 2, it's 1 versus 3. I don't think anybody in America is saying, well, you know what, I was going to watch the game if it was 1 versus 2, but since it's 1 versus 3, I ain't going to watch it. everybody's still going to watch the game. But I will say that I think Georgia needs to win more than Tennessee does. And the only reason I say that is because if you look at Tennessee's resume, even if they lose this game, which if they do, that means not only are they not going to win the SEC, but they're not even going to win their half because Georgia will win the East. But Tennessee can still look and say, look, we beat Alabama. We destroyed LSU because right now LSU's a top 10 team, but they'll lose one more game, but still probably be a top 15 team. So if you're Tennessee, you're going to have wins over Alabama and you're going to have a win over LSU. So if you go 11-1, yes, you don't win your conference. Yes, you don't win your division, but you can still say, hey, we've got a good enough resume to where we should be in the top 4. Whereas if Georgia loses this game, the only decent win on Georgia's schedule is the Oregon game. And outside of that game, they're going to have not a win over anybody worth a darn all year long. So Georgia needs to win more than Tennessee does to help their resume. And I know I said it in last week's video, and I'll say it again. I think Georgia wins the game. But the only reason I think Georgia wins the game is because the game is in Athens. I just don't see Tennessee going to Athens and winning. Neutral site game, I'd pick the Vols. In Knoxville, I'd pick the Vols because I think both teams are evenly matched. But if you look at Tennessee's season stats, they have scored at least 40 points in every game but 2, and that was against Pittsburgh and against Florida, where they scored 34 and 38. So logic would tell you that Tennessee's going to score at least 30 points. Now, there's a chance they may not. Maybe their offense has a bad game and Georgia's defense has a great game and Tennessee only scores 21. But logic would tell you Tennessee's going to score at least 30, but I think Georgia will score at least 40. If I made a prediction right now, I'd say something like Georgia 45, Tennessee 35, 45-34, 48-35, something like that. Between 10 and 14 points is what I think it'll be. But I think Georgia will win the game only because the game is in Athens. And that's only because both teams are so evenly matched. It's hard to look over both teams' rosters and actually sit down and study both teams and just automatically think it's going to be a one-sided game. I don't think it will. I think it'll be a close game. I think it'll be a competitive game. I think you're going to see both offenses move the ball pretty easily, but I think Georgia wins. The one thing that I can't figure out, and it just shows how many people don't actually watch the games, is people still pretend that Tennessee is a passing team, and they're not. Tennessee runs the ball more than Georgia does, and Georgia is supposed to be known as the running team, but yet Tennessee runs the ball more than they do. But everybody acts like the Vols are a passing team, and they're not. They're a balanced football team. You just don't see teams have the kind of offense that they do and be as good as they are and think they'd run the ball. You think, well, an offense like that, scoring that many points, they're a passing team, but they're not. They're a balanced football team. Josh Heupel's just an offensive genius, and it's hard to stop them because if you watch their wide receivers, they put one way over on the left hash and one way over on the right hash. So they use the entire football field. So they spread you out big time, which is why they're so successful. So I think they'll score Saturday, but the game being in Athens, I still say Georgia wins the game. I don't think it'll be a blowout like last year was, but I think Georgia wins the game. I have no clue what the point spread is, but I think Georgia wins the game. But even if they do, unless they just beat Tennessee by 30 points and I'm wrong and the game is lopsided, I don't think Tennessee falls out of the top 5. And we've seen earlier this year when Bama lost and they were way up there, they didn't fall that far. So if Tennessee loses unless they get blowed out of the water and get boat raced, I don't think they'll fall out of the top 5. We also have Central Florida at Memphis at 3:30 on Saturday. And then Saturday night, we have Alabama at LSU. And I want LSU to win this game so bad, just so Bama has 2 losses. Now, they're still not going to fall out of the top 10. Bama could lose this week and next week, and they wouldn't fall further than 15th. It's just not going to happen. But if they lose to LSU Saturday night, at least they'll fall down to 9 or 10, and we can be done talking about Alabama being in the playoffs. So hopefully LSU wins that game, and this might be the first time all year long that Bama actually plays a good 4 quarters, because I've yet to see it. And then we also have Texas at Kansas State at 7 o'clock Saturday night. Then at 7:30 Saturday night, we have Clemson at Notre Dame. And then we have Auburn at Mississippi State. It'll be Auburn's first game with their new head coach, who, of course, is a interim head coach until they name their new head coach. And then we have South Carolina at Vanderbilt. And this is a game that South Carolina has to win, because you looked pitiful last week against Missouri at home. And after this game, South Carolina ends the season with what they call the Orange Crush, because they play Florida, Tennessee, and Clemson in 3 consecutive weeks. But you're good enough to beat Florida. You should beat Florida. Florida is an absolute disaster right now, which, by the way, in case you have not heard, they released Brenton Cox earlier this week from the program. But if you're South Carolina, you're better than Florida. You should beat Florida. So that gives you a chance to have a 7-win season. But you only get there if you beat Vanderbilt. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think if you lose back-to-back games to Missouri and Vanderbilt, and you play Florida next week, you're going to be so down in the dumps that I think Florida beats you. And no doubt in my mind, Tennessee beats you and Clemson beats you. But if you can get back on track and beat Vanderbilt, you should beat Florida and get to 7 wins on the season, which is about where everybody expected them to be. I believe when I did my South Carolina preseason preview, I picked them to win 7 games. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure I did. So they're right where I thought they would be. But if you follow the Beamer family, you know back when Frank Beamer coached the Hokies, he always won by Beamer ball, because he never did have a great offensive team. He always won with special teams and defense. And now his son Shane is trying to do the same thing at South Carolina. The only difference is football's changed so much, and you cannot win anymore with defense alone. You have got to have an offense. And for whatever reason, South Carolina just does not have one. And I'm not going to sit here and say that it's all Beamer's fault, because when they were coached by Sean Elliott, they sucked on offense. When they were coached by Will Muschamp, they sucked on offense. So they keep changing coaches and getting the same result. They have weapons on offense, but they suck. Now, of course, right now the scapegoat is the offensive coordinator, and I feel bad for him because he'll probably end up getting fired when the season is over with. But just like last year when Clemson's offense was average and everybody blamed DJ, even though if you actually watched the games, you'd realize they used 7 different combinations on the offensive line because they couldn't block, they couldn't run, and when DJ made good throws, the receivers dropped them. They had dropped passes all over the field. So when you can't run the ball, and you can't throw the ball, and you can't block, there ain't much you can do. But yet everybody blamed it on DJ. And this year at South Carolina, they can't block, they can't throw, and they can run when Lloyd is healthy, but he's having a hard time staying healthy. So when you can't pass, you can't run, you can't block, I don't know what you can do. But of course, Satterfield's taking all the blame. If I'm South Carolina, I would get Spencer Rattler off the field. I said for the season started that I didn't get why everybody is so in love with Spencer Rattler, because he's not any good. They're 5-3 right now, whether they're playing Spencer Rattler or whether they're playing Luke Doty. The only difference is when Doty plays, you're 5-3. It's okay. For some reason, Rattler's a 5-star quarterback, so when he plays, you expect more than 5-3, but that's what you are. I don't care if Spencer Rattler's a 900-star quarterback. He sucks. He is not any good. And right now they've got an issue because their two main players on offense is the quarterback, and of course, every time they throw the ball, they throw it to Stogner. And both of those guys transferred from Oklahoma. So it looks like Beamer's wanting to feature them to show future transfer guys, hey, if you come here, we'll play you. Watch last year. Watch how much we played Rattler. Watch how much we played Stogner. And they're not winning like that. So you're trying to help future transfer guys, but you're hurting future recruit guys because you've got guys behind them that are better than them that are not playing. So right now they're in a pickle. What do you do? Bench your quarterback and go ahead and go to the next guy, or stay with Rattler because he transferred there? I've got a feeling they're going to stick with Rattler. I think before the season started, they pretty much told him, hey, if you come here, you'll be our quarterback. So I think he's going to quarterback the rest of the season no matter what happens unless he gets hurt. Also at 7:30, we have a rivalry game between Florida State and Miami. Now, 25, 30 years ago, this was one of the biggest rivalries in college football, if not the biggest for a time. But then, of course, both programs were down for so long. Florida State looks like they're finally on the uptick, going back in the right direction. Miami, they just suck. But since it is a rivalry game, it should be a good football game. And then 8 o'clock Saturday night, we have Wake Forest at NC State. This game will be the battle of second place in the ACC Atlantic behind Clemson. I think it'll be a good game, but I do think Wake Forest will win that game. Any thoughts on any games this upcoming weekend? Please feel free to let me know. If you enjoy the Tuesday night and Wednesday night football, please feel free to let me know. I know it's just the MAC and nobody watches the MAC, but people love college football. So if you're sitting down on a Tuesday night and you're not doing anything and the game is on, even though it's teams you probably know nothing about, why not watch the game? And it gives those teams and those conferences a chance to actually get some love and get noticed. Let's go ahead and get our dad joke of the day in here. When two vegans get into an argument, is this still called a beef? And that wraps it up for today's Ref Brandon and the Todd Family YouTube video. Until next time, it's Ref Brandon saying, just like in pro wrestling, life can be over by the count of 3. Tell your friends and family how much you love them.